Good morning, everybody, and welcome on behalf of the Australian Water Partnerships for Development to this session this morning. From sea to source, stories of climate resilience across connected by water. We're going to take you on a journey this morning that very much shows sort of the critical role that water plays in all its various forms in the current climate story. So welcome to the water system that we're going to actually explore today. My name is Alison Baker. I'm currently the fund manager for the Australian government's funded Water for Women Fund that's operating across 15 different countries in the Indo-Pacific region, working with partners to deliver water, sanitation and hygiene services in both an inclusive and climate resilient way. So, to kick off, we have a very, very special demonstration. So I'd like to hand over to Lisa Margaret Kingsbury, who's going to demonstrate the impact of sea level rise on an atoll in the Pacific. So handing over to Lisa.
Morning, everyone. Okay, so this part of the session actually works better if you come up a little closer. So don't be shy, get out of your chairs, come up. What you're looking at here, the lighting isn't on our side, but basically what you're looking at is a 3D model built to scale of Majuro in the Marshall Islands. It's a part of the main island of the Marshalls, of Majuro, which is their capital. Now, what I do want to say is this is actually the widest part of the atoll. So where the population actually lives is much more narrow. But this area, the reason that we've modelled this particular area is this is one of their most critical water sources. And so what I'll show you is normal scenarios and the water work that's been happening in terms of groundwater work. And this is very similar work that's happening in Kiribati, in Tuvalu and other atoll nations across the region. But then what and how sea level rise affects water security and food security in terms of the predictions moving forward. So what you're looking at is the widest part, population of about 2,500, major food security and major water security area. If we look at the freshwater lens, so this is, I'll load them all at the same time. So this actually sits under the island. This is the freshwater lens that sits under the atoll and sits on top of the saltwater. It's about 25 metres deep. It's a pretty significant freshwater lens. These blue arms that you can see, these little crosses, they're actually the extraction points for the water. So instead of sticking a straw into a cup, the way that you'd extract water out of a normal borehole, because it's a really shallow lens sitting on top of fresh water, we stick the straw sideways. And so it just skims the top of the fresh water, brings the water up, and then goes to a processing plant, and then obviously gets to distribution. This area covers this community. However, during the drought in 2015-2016, there was a really severe drought in the Marshalls and in the north. And this water was basically the drought resource for the entire population of the main part of the island. What we wanted to understand is how sea level rise and normal conditions, pre-sea level rise, affected the water lens. And so let me just turn a few quick layers off. So pre-sea level rise, now this is 1990 to 2000 baselines because the region's already experiencing sea level rise at a particular rate. So this is a baseline pre any sea level rise impacts. You can see around the edges this tiny blue line. That's actually wave flooding coming in from an inundation event that we call a 1 in 10 year event. So this is pre-sea level rise, normal event, something you'd see once every 10 years. It's not existential. It's not in the water lens. It's not hitting the food security. It's something that the community would be able to recover from quickly. If you look at a 1 in 100 year event, so noting this is something you'd only want to see, if you live to 100 once. It's a pretty significant event. You can see the red bits, that's where infrastructure is affected. This is the high school. So you can start to see the waters coming further in and getting deeper. But again, this contour around here, it's not quite hitting the water lens. So even a 1 in 100 year event is not having significant impact on the water security at all. There's no salt water going into the freshwater lens. It's not a major concern. However, if we go back to the 1 in 10 year event, this tiny little line around the edge, and we add 50 centimetres of sea level rise, so just 50 centimetres, half a metre of sea level rise, this is what that scenario looks like. So a 50 centimetre sea level rise, based on the best modelling. This data is super expensive data. It's within a millimetre of resolution. You can see this is worse than a 1 in 100 year event. So 50 centimetres of sea level rise, that's a 1 in 100 year normal event. And this is a 50 centimetre sea level rise, and this would be expected every 10 years. This is a 1 in 10 year event with 50 centimetres of sea level rise. You can see it's in the water security. What we're doing at the moment as SPC is we're working with the Marshall Islands to actually understand the climate impact of this water scenario. So how quickly would the lens recharge? It does recharge. It rains, it filters through into the fresh water, but we don't know how quickly it would recharge in a scenario like this, and that's what we're modelling at the moment. However, this kind of scenario could happen as early as 2030 or as late as 2070, based on the decisions that you're all working to at meetings like this. So it depends on how emissions go as to how quickly the countries get to this point. If we look at a 1 metre scenario, which is looking more at a 2100 kind of expectation, you can see there's a full overtopping. And so at this point, we know that there would be severe implications for food security and water security. But again, this isn't where we need to go. This is a prediction based on scenarios that we're heading towards, but this doesn't mean that this is where we need to be. The message really is around showing that if we can slow things down, countries have the time to adapt and the time to actually, access the finance to be able to adapt in terms of these scenarios. And remembering this is the widest part. So the more shallow parts of the island or the thinner parts, they're getting more inundation events like this. And so Kathy Gentile-Kitchener, the climate envoy, was meant to present this morning, but unfortunately she's been tied up in a meeting, with negotiations. So if you do have any questions, please let me know, and she should be here by the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'll just give everybody a moment to sit down. But yes, thank you for taking the time to outline that model. It's very confronting. It makes us actually really, I think, understand the situation that we're actually in. The stakes are really high in so many of these places. And I've actually been to the Marshall Islands myself, to Majuro, but also to a little island called Ebi. And it's about, you can stand on one side and look across the other, and it's very flat. And I know it's one of the few places that I've been where you actually do feel vulnerable. You're in this little island in the middle of the Pacific. So thank you again, Lisa. And hopefully Kathy will be here by the end to actually give her personal reflections on what's happening at the moment. So the situation is dire. This is just one example of the impacts of climate change, and there are many, many more. And I suppose from one perspective, we can all feel very hopeless about the situation. But I don't know, maybe it's me, but I think there's a lot of people in this room in the same situation. We're optimistic. The strength of the human spirit, the commitment of people to really actually work together, I think will enable us to actually work together and find what those solutions are. So, water. It has so many different aspects to it, and there's so many different ways that climate change actually impacts water. And we're going to demonstrate and explore some of those today. But not only are we going to explore the challenges, we're actually going to explore some of the solutions and how do we actually work together to actually do that. This model demonstrates a lot of the physical realities when we look at water. How much water do we have and its impacts, looking at the whole sort of water security, water resource management side of things. How does it actually change through the year or through time? Are we going to have flooding? Are we going to have droughts? The whole water quantity aspect of things. Does it get polluted by the sanitation systems that we use water for? Again, the whole water quality side of it. How much energy is used to actually treat all those different systems, whether it's water or sanitation? All those operational needs actually associated with climate change as well. And the whole climate risk-informed infrastructure the whole engineering and the design process. Those are all the sort of physical aspects of water that we know we need to actually work through and understand better when we're trying to manage it. But in looking at all those, it just gives us that real sense of that critical aspect of water and the role that it actually plays in all of our lives, whether it's human health, whether it's livelihoods, whether it's agriculture and food security, economic development, energy systems, environmental health. It touches everything, it permeates everything. And we've had some of those conversations over the last couple of days, just that ubiquitous way that water actually underpins so much of what we actually do. So this is all we looked at the model. There's a lot of sort of science and data goes into that, as Lisa actually said. But there's a whole other aspect of managing water and managing climate impacts and working towards climate resilience that we also need to take into account. And that's marrying in the power of the people and their ability to create new and innovative solutions in all of their various local environments, whether it's in the Marshall Islands, whether it's in India, whether it's in Australia, wherever it is. All of those different regions have their own solutions that they have to develop, but they're all very, very important. And we also need to learn from our traditional and our Indigenous leaders and their practices around the globe and integrate those into the ways that we need to move forward as we effectively work to manage both our water and our climate. They've been doing that for thousands of years. How can we actually learn from them and integrate that into it? So the questions that sort of come up when we look at those aspects, have we included the voices of everyone in the community, including women and marginalised groups, the whole gender and social inclusion piece? What behaviours do we need to change as individuals, communities, institutions, politicians, the whole behaviour change aspect of water management as well? What kind of systems do we need to effectively manage to get water and climate solutions? The system strengthening, but also the integration of water management systems and climate change systems as well. How do we all allocate that water amongst all its various uses, the whole policy and legislative environments as well? And then finally, how can we learn from our Indigenous and other traditional practices to integrate future water management, the whole Indigenous knowledge? And to build on that, Phil, if you'd like to come up here for a moment, we're going to start to integrate the Indigenous culture into what we're actually going to do today.
Yamaninda, Phil Naya, Gomeroi Māori, that's hello and welcome. My name's Phil and I'm a very proud Kamilaroi man. Just to reaffirm about our welcome to country and our acknowledgement of countries, they're modern day interpretations of an ancient custom and practice where one seeks and receives permission to move through lands beyond our own traditional boundaries. And I would like to, on behalf of our session, acknowledge the First Peoples of this country, that we get to collaborate internationally, share our knowledge, share our ideas, share the load and share the journey. And hopefully we share a vision of investing together and looking at the future through the eyes of our next generations. So what I'm about to do is to pass over a talking stick, which is by Ami the Creator, our rainbow serpent. And it's got the footprints of my mother, the Dinawan, the emu, and me. So now...
Thank you, Phil. So as we go through this journey through the water system over the next little while, we're going to, as Phil has just done, we're going to integrate the Indigenous culture into it. Phil and I met actually at COP last year and started to build not only a friendship personally and professionally, but I've learned an awful lot over that period of time just about Indigenous culture. The scarf I actually have on today is called Water Dreaming. And I thought that was a good thing to actually wear today as we actually explore water in all its various forms. So we're not going to unpack all of those different questions that I flagged. We can't do that in the next 35, 40 minutes. But we're going to touch on a lot of those and go on that journey together. But as we do that, we're going to actually use this talking stick and integrate that into what we do. So welcome, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah Ransom, who's the General Manager of the Australian Water Partnerships, and she's going to take us through the next part of this journey. So. Oh, this is going to be interesting.
Why don't I...
Would you want me to hold it for a minute?
link Australia and the Pacific together a little bit. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for coming to our session today. My name's Sarah. I won't waste any more time introducing myself. I would like to actually ask our first speaker to join us. So Anna Nuariki from Kiribati, from the Tunguru Climate Alliance. Would you come up to the stage, please, Anna? Big welcome. So we started this session today in the Marshall Islands, Anna, and now we're moving to your country in Kiribati. It's also a coral atoll. So Anna, I'm really keen to hear from you if we can learn some more about the impacts on your community of climate and water issues. If you'd tell your story, we'd be most grateful. Thank you.
I'll hold it on your behalf. Thank you. You can touch it. Touch it. Touch it. And then I'll stand over here. Actually, I feel in the way.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here, and before I proceed on, I just want to thank all those who have made it possible for me to be here, the UN Women and the IPO, so they are able to let me share my story here with you. And as mentioned, Kiribati is one of the islands that is at the front line of climate change. We contribute so little to climate change, but we are at the front line and being the worst country to be affected. We are just 1.5 to 3 meters above the sea level. So, and also our country has been facing a lot of issues in regard to climate change. One of the worst things that we have been facing is the saline of water. Kiribati is only relying on underground water. That is the only means of water we can get. Otherwise, we'll be able to get it if we have a rain. But it's, within this time, it is difficult because of the change in the weather pattern. The drought has been extended, and even the rainfalls as well been limited. So for communities like our communities, what we have been facing now, even though we have donations on water rain system, they are of no use because there's no rain. How can we get our fresh water? So this is what we are really worried about. And this is really affecting also our livelihoods, our people, our crops. And so what we are doing in our community, because I'm working with the grassroots people, I try to gather all women and share our stories on how can we face this climate issue, knowing that we are resilient people of our own country, having our own indigenous knowledge on how to manage it, but it also has been affected by the impact of climate change. So what we used to do, what we call in Kiribati Meroro, we gather together and share our stories on how our communities have been affected. So I'll share one story that really affected me with my community. This was in 2013, when I was just, in the afternoon, I was just standing beside my little boys who were playing. One was just 1 year old. When all of a sudden, a giant wave came in and just washed away our land. My husband was trying to save our well water, trying to stop it so that it won't be contaminated or won't be inundated by the sea. Fortunately, it went the other direction, but it has been affecting other homes. And as for us, our life, we are just living a simple life. We just have a simple housing, and on the floor we have to lie and all our things there. So most of the people's belongings were destroyed at that time. That worries me, and I slept overnight and I couldn't sleep because I was wondering what will happen next. Because now with that no warning given to us, it's really affected us. I worried and I wonder what will happen to my kid tomorrow. So with that takes us to the next step where we gather together and then find our ways. So our women share their own traditional skills. Like Kiribati, we cannot share our skills as a family because that is treasured as a family ownership. And there we share on how to work it out. So they give us some ways on how to maintain our water. The only thing we have to do, we have to build up a fence, trying to protect it from being inundated. And so with that, we still have very limited water since the water lens is becoming very thin due to the coastal erosion. And also the strong heat of the sun that is also increasing. It is also taking out the fresh water. So our food crops were worsened that we are not able to even produce because we don't have enough fresh water. And our soil is also that very poor since it is alkaline. So what we did, we have to find ways. And so we were able to have help from others who are more expert on agriculture. So we call them and to help us on how can we produce food. Because now we are relying heavily on imported food. We cannot live on our own because it's not enough for us to grow. And so I went to my husband's island. That is in just January. When I went there, I was so shocked to see that all the food crops and trees have fallen, tops were fallen because they were dried up. I got really scared on how will they survive. But the spirit of Kiribati people, as you know, they are very joyful and happy people, no matter what, as resilient people. I was asking them and they said, well, this is part of life. We know how to live our ways and find our ways out. So I really admire them, but I feel sorry on how will they manage when all the fruit crops are dead. All that they have is that they have to depend on imported food. So that is the struggle we have in our place. We are really, really affected, especially with our water, because we only have underground water. How can we survive? Because that is the only means of life. Without water, we will not be able to survive, as in our island, as well as you people in your island and your country. So these are some of the stories I would like to share and hope you understand. And some of the help that we have received from the government is that the desalination, but it's not enough. There are 23 islands inhabited, but the desalination will be just going now to 2 islands. What about the rest? It is taking time because it is so costly. And this morning, when one of our friends was sharing, I really touched because he was talking about the sharing of knowledge. And as indigenous people, it is very important for us to share. And at this time, I think it's time for us to share our differences and our skills so that we'll be able to survive. Because I don't want my island to be sinking. I want to stay there, no matter what. This is my identity, and it's where my family, my ancestors were. We are really connected with our island. Therefore, I would not dare move out because that's our life. So I ask those Catholic missionaries who are giving the words to please think twice and look at us, put their feet in our shoes so that they can feel our feeling and see how we feel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for that wonderful reminder that words like adaptation cover many human lives and many human stories of loss and change due to climate change. Having spent some time with our friends in the Pacific, we'll now start to move up an imaginary river, which is how we've conceptualised this session. So in order to do that, I'd like to invite our good friend, Turia Wickham, who's from World Vision in Papua New Guinea. Turia is a leader in community-based water and sanitation. Take the message stick. Thank you, Anna. Turia, can I ask you, can you talk a bit about how your work with communities in PNG has exposed you to how people are dealing with the impact of climate issues and how local knowledge is used in addressing some of those challenges?
Yeah, thanks. That's okay. I'll hold on to it. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all here. I'd just like to, first of all, acknowledge the message stick that I'm holding. It's significant for me because on this message stick is a totem of Phil's mum, a strong woman who's on this message stick. And just speaking to the question Sarah's asked about what we're doing to deal with climate change. What's the significance of a woman in the climate change conversation. This is, I'd like to thank. I have to use my teacher voice now. Okay. Yeah, I like the mic voice better. Anyways, first of all, the Water for Women Fund, who funds a lot of the projects we do, and an important one, which is the WASH Consortium in Papua New Guinea. And yeah, for bringing us here to such an important conversation. This is my first COP, and sometimes it feels like we're a really small voice trying to get everyone to listen. And that's painful in a lot of ways, because we don't do a lot to contribute to the warming climate that's contributing to high sea level rises. So we've had some of the biggest king tides in our country in the last 3 years. And what does that mean? While we are busy regurgitating statistics at global conventions such as this, children are not able to go to school simply because a parent cannot sell the crops that are now impacted by climate change because they're small. They're not getting the money that they used to. So there's decreased economic livelihood ability in those communities. Unless you have that lived experience, it's difficult for you to understand that. It's difficult for any of us to understand. So the statistics are there, but it's really hard for someone at a convention here to put a dying child in the grave because they haven't got access to health. They haven't got enough water, good water. 85% of the communities in Papua New Guinea are rural communities. They have to walk to get water. It's getting difficult every year because our groundwater reserves are also going down. They're contaminated by the king tides as well. And these are realities. We need to put faces to the statistics. Can we? Are we able to at conventions such as these? So while we are tussling over this amount of increase and that amount of, warming of the atmosphere, our people are still having to deal with sea level rises. One of the things that's not talked about a lot is conflict that arises from climate change. And the conflicts are increasing because of the soil degradation. Land is being washed away. It's been rendered useless because you can't plant with soils of high saline or salinity. So people are moving to different places where culturally that's not their place. And there's conflicts arising from that. What are we doing? Is your question, Sarah. The work we do is we are trying to recognize the importance of traditional knowledge. And there's a misconception that traditional knowledge is archaic, it's stagnant, it's still. It is not. It is a valued piece of our culture. It is a valued piece of our history, and it responds to our needs as well today as it did in the past. So we want to change that misconception, and we are recognizing the important role that women play in conflict resolution. Where you can't plant food on this piece of earth because it belongs to another family, women are at the forefront, brokering peace between communities. It's not easy, ladies and gentlemen. It is not easy coming from a predominantly male society, patriarchal society. Not an easy task. And then we are going in there trying to have those conversations, tricky conversations. But we are trying to foreground that and celebrate the traditional knowledge in terms of the crops that we're planting, drought-resistant crops. There was a time, and recently there's been a bit of a scare with industrial companies coming in trying to sell seeds. And it was happening. It was starting to change. And we started realizing there's no food security in that. Because then they expect us to buy the seeds after a while. Where are we going to get the money when we don't have the soil to plant crops? So the impacts of climate change are far-reaching. It's not just about sea level rising, it's not just about soil degradation, it comes down to livelihoods, lives of people, not just statistics. A woman who has to walk a far distance because she has to use the bush because there's no toilets close by. And she's raped. We have to use these words. We can't be pretty anymore. No cotton covering stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry, but I'm not sorry. These are the realities. When you're sitting with women and you're talking about their stories and they're telling you that they have been abused because they have to walk a fair distance, not to even reach water, just to get to a bush, to use the toilets, something we take for granted. In the global north, these things are taken for granted. We have to recognize that we play a part. If we are contributing to the problem, what is our solution? Small Pacific Island countries don't need to come and beg. Noga through. In Pisin, that means not at all. Enough now. This is enough. Our call is to say thank you to those who recognize that there are things that we can do in our communities using our traditional knowledge, using the strengths we have in our communities, and not just looking elsewhere. When we talk about local solutions for global problems, that's basically what it is. So yeah, thanks. I might be rattling on. Thank you everyone for listening. Let's all be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Turia. We really appreciate hearing your wisdom, and we're all listening and hearing those voices here today at COP. We're going to move up our metaphorical river slightly to a city based on a river now, and I'll invite Professor Tony Wong from the Water Sensitive Cities Australia at Monash University to join us. Take the message sick. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Turia. Yeah, Tony needs the clicker. Tony, as we move up our river to the city, can I ask you to speak about the role of water-sensitive urban design in building resilience in cities and their surrounding areas?
Thank you, Sarah. And first of all, I'd like to acknowledge speakers before me here and the really heartwarming narrative of the impact of climate. And what I have to say and what I have to present to some degree pales into some insignificance when we actually look at some of the impacts that you're experiencing. But nevertheless, I really want to talk about my journey through the development of strategies for cities in terms of climate resilience and the demonstration of the implementation of that strategy, albeit in the first world, in Australia and in other parts. But I hope that some of the lessons and proof of concept that I will present might give us the motivation to adapt those knowledge into the developing arena. So I'll start with the notion of water-sensitive cities. And throughout the last 15, 20 years, we were developing strategies on what is it we need to do to strengthen the resilience of urban settlements, cities. Now that is important from my perspective in the sense that cities are the intersection of all our challenges. You know, we can't actually differentiate or demarcate water challenges from a whole range of other challenges related to sustainability, resilience, and livability in the city. A city is a melting pot. It is also where the greatest financial impact of climate change is because of the concentration of global economy, GDPs of countries in cities. And so in the process of doing that, what we've done over the last 15 years was to basically develop 3 basic principles of good practice in delivering sustainability and resilience to cities. And I'll start with them. Those 3 principles, really, we have tested it, are to some degree guiding our development of strategies. The concept that cities are water supply catchments. Simply thinking that we actually need to look at water from within before we are reliant on water from outside coming in. It's a very simple sort of principles that drives our concept to water recycling, drive our concept to circular economy in reusing water as much as possible within our city boundary, drive our strategies on looking at harvesting stormwater, protecting groundwater, all of that. And if we actually think of our cities as water supply catchments, we will completely rethink the planning of our city and how we manage land use in our city, because now we are actually protecting the very source where water would be derived. Some of the examples might be, say, in Singapore. Singapore have actually started to think about that and think about diversifying its water sources. In Singapore, there are 4 water sources that they are now reliant on. Before, they were reliant on water from Malaysia, an external source. Now they are really emphasizing on recycling their wastewater as a second source. They have desalination plant as a third source, and stormwater harvesting. Not a drop of rainwater leaves Singapore now. They are all harvested. As an example of how you now diversify your water sources as a city, as a water supply catchment. In Australia, in Melbourne, for instance, we are actually looking at the redevelopment of some part of Melbourne called Fisherman's Bend. And in that, we are now looking at how even within the building, the water that we use in our kitchen, in our shower, in our toilet, in our kitchen, in the shower, are actually captured and returned back into the building for toilet flushing as a within building local recycling loop, so that water is used twice. The area of development in Melbourne and buildings whereby the green walls of the building are used to filter that water and clean it to a level whereby it can actually be used, reused within the building as a closed loop. In Fisherman's Bend, we are also looking at how we can actually extract water from our sewer, reuse it for non-drinking purposes. Remembering that in most communities, nearly 70 to 80% of water consumption do not require drinking water standards. And if we can actually break that expectation that all water coming to our community needs to be of drinking quality, we can actually reach a higher level of sustainability just by having that understanding of different fit-for-purpose water. In Perth, in Australia, there is now a significant effort to actually look at wastewater being recycled and injected back into the ground. A really important strategy, especially for small island states whereby the injection of freshwater lens into the ground can actually go a long way in preventing saltwater intrusion into your aquifer, creating, if you like, a freshwater barrier that actually starts to prevent saltwater intrusion from them. So that is something that we can actually start to adapt for small island states as well. And of course, in Adelaide, the harvesting of stormwater through constructed wetlands and injected into the ground such that in the dry season, that is being pulled back up into the ground, almost like a bank account of water resources. So you can see that that concept is flowing through a lot of our cities. The second principle of practice is that cities can be designed to provide ecosystem services, which is put simply that we can actually start to green our city to ensure that it provides a range of ecosystem services such as water cleansing. Stormwater that runs off our city carries with it pollution. If there are nature-based solutions that are integrated into our cities, it can actually start to cleanse that water before it even reach our rivers. If that water is cleansed before reaching our rivers, we go a long way to protecting the quality of our rivers in our city. So you can see now that we have turned this whole principle around, whereby in the past, every city that's being developed take ecosystem services from the environment. We are now introducing design strategy that builds in cities that delivers ecosystem services both to the built community and to adjoining environments. Some of this may be things that you would see, but they are not just there to look pretty. They have ecological functions, such as the street in Melbourne, whereby that central part is also a flood conveyance channel, but it also is a cleansing for all storm water. Doesn't have to be a flood. Every time it rains, water is being cleansed by that. The trees provide microclimate enhancement to the local communities in the urban heat. So you can see the sort of multitude of ecosystem services that you can, through this whole concept, that we can design our cities to deliver ecosystem services. In a larger scale, in the project we did in China, we have transformed the whole city by simply using transport corridors and the space within the transport corridors to be fitted with ecosystems services, nature-based solutions such as this, for safe flood water and conveyance, for harvesting of flood water, for delivering a level of microclimate and urban livability for those cities. And you can see that that is all part of being how it is embedded into the design of our cities. And finally, the third practice is really about the people. City comprising water-sensitive communities. That is you and I. And the key thing is there are 3 levels of this. First of all, to ensure that our community has a good understanding of their vulnerability, where their water comes from, where their water goes to, because with that understanding, they start to become a meaningful participant in decision-making at the local level. Secondly, we need to ensure that our professionals, you and I, are equipped with the right knowledge and the right tool to deliver innovation. That is really just about a fancy word for capacity building. We need to actually start to provide our practitioners with the right tool. And finally, in terms of water-sensitive communities, our government creating enabling policies to make for innovation, enabling policies that are so different from the kind of policies that they have now, which really looks at water as a commodity, not just as a value to culture, a value to ecosystem services. That needs to be broken. The integration of different departments and institutions, that is where government has a role in creating the enabling environment for the practitioners to innovate and for the community to participate in a lot of local decision making. Some of the examples, like the Water Sensitive City Principle Master Plan for Fisherman's Bend, is a good example of how this is where government are working to create the enabling policy for innovation. I'd like to finish there now. Thank you, Sarah. But I just want to perhaps make the final point that those 3 principles of practice have been applied and tested in many, many different settings, biophysical settings, institutional settings, but they do drive our decisions in how we develop strategies that are fit for purpose. Thank you.
Is this one working? Yes. Thank you so much, Tony. I'd just like to pause for a second and just sit with the messages that we've heard. So some voices from communities and from the perspective of cities. And we have a really clear picture now of the interrelationship between communities, climate, fresh water, and the ocean. They're all completely dependent on each other. And water is the connector between all these elements. I would now like to ask Phil Duncan, who's the Galambani Professorial Fellow at the University of Canberra, to speak. So Phil, I'd like to ask you a specific question about this sort of systems perspective. I think we're all struggling a little bit with all of these dense interconnections between different elements of this climate and water puzzle. How water contributes to everything in the adaptation landscape. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how Indigenous knowledge can help us to grapple with this. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work with Indigenous knowledge around water and how, in your view, that water knowledge, traditional Indigenous water knowledge needs to be better recognised for the way it can help us deal with these complex systemic issues?
Marabu, that's thank you in my language, to my Bawa, my sister. First, I want to again reaffirm and acknowledge country. I want to acknowledge every woman in this audience here today. And, as a man, and there are men in the audience, including my family, just to know that we stand with and for you. That we can, as men, be the agents of change to ensure that the rematriation of our knowledge of our women and sitting at the table with us, sharing the load and sharing the journey. This image I start with is the Seven Sisters. It's a story of our constellation. It connects the east coast to the west coast, to the north to the south. It is women's dreaming. It's part of our constellations, part of our song lines, part of our knowledge of journey that's transgenerationally handed down. I also want to have a bit of a call out for particularly two young people, Caleb Adams and Amber, two extremely intelligent young Indigenous people that we will be investing in because there is going to be a changing of the guard. But this image about the Seven Sisters is also about our connection to country, our cultural responsibilities. And yes, we do think in systems. This new age way of thinking around systems thinking, we think in cultural systems. We think spatially, we think temporally. We think about the people upstream. We think about the primary responsibilities where we sit in that system that needs to be connected for a cultural way of life, quality cultural way of life, longevity of life, and quality of life. We also have a very strong focus on thinking about the mob downstream. Now, sorry, mob is Aboriginal people, Indigenous people, First Nations people. So when we think in systems, we think about it as an entire system, not in reaches, not in piecemeal processes. We need to think about our Indigenous food security of the fish, the aquatic habitats, water quality that, you know, is fit for purpose. And I'm going to challenge you to think not about traditional ecological knowledge. For me, it's a cultural science. In Australia, we've existed on the driest inhabited continent on this planet since time immemorial. Not 65,000 years, since time immemorial. We know when that flower was blooming, we know the fish is running. We know when the Dinawan, the emu that lives in the Milky Way, when the legs are hanging down, we know it's time to harvest emu eggs, Dinawan eggs, for those that are allowed to. This is a science. We know when the ants are coming downstream on leaves and bark, we know there's a flood coming. This science, this cultural science, has sustained us. We are a resilient people, as with many Indigenous people globally. So, cultural science and Western science, from my perspectives, from my professional life, from my cultural way of life, from my personal way of life, they coexist. They should not be looked upon as competitive science mechanisms, ideologies. They do coexist, they can underpin one another's options. In actual fact, it creates greater options for us to look at how we can use a harder option or a softer option. You know, my people used to dam the rivers, or what we call the veins that are connected to our arteries. You call them rivers and anabranches. And they harvest the eggs from our yellow belly or gay and go to our iconic Murray cod. We were doing aquaculture in those anabranches and growing out and then dismantling those temporary barriers and then letting those fingerlings go. Indigenous food security, sustainability. I challenge you to bring us together so that we can share our knowledge. We live in a world of shrinking resource availability, and everybody talks about money, money, money. But I want you to think about the powerhouse of knowledge and how we can come together to create different ideologies and bring together different ideologies and methodologies so that we can think and look at the plan for the future through the eyes of our next generation. I've mentioned the hard. We need to start thinking about ourselves as science communicators. Taking the Western science and the cultural science, building the capacity of all our communities. In this case, I'm going to talk about Aboriginal, Indigenous, First Nations communities. Building the capacity of those leaders and the future generations together. Sorry. I'm a man, forgive me. So we do think in systems, and this is, I gave a talk, and this is what a graphic artist captured from my talk. It's not unique to me. This is what our leaders in our communities have to go through every day of their lives. Both our men and our yinners, that's our women. So using simple English, using modern day technology to be able to translate Western science into our cultural and integrating it into our cultural way of life, and vice versa. We heard nature-based solutions. I want you to think about nature-based cultural solutions. I think the word culture adds a lot more credibility and a lot more strength. It creates the windows of opportunities that bring us together. And look at how and what actions and how we can implement those actions by empowering the communities to take the lead. Again, don't forget, this is all about a systems thinking, from the source to the sea and back up. When you write your records, your reports, I challenge you not just to write the written word, to incorporate the verbal recorded word, validating that cultural science that sits alongside Western science, and demonstrating that they actually do coexist. How do you put emotion into those written reports? Images. We've seen the modelling. I've showed you some images. We've heard my sister talk about the trauma of community through a female's lens, a female leader's lens. We need to be brave enough to stand together, draw a line in the sand and say, this is how we're going to do business. Being better together as we move forward into the future. Because these communities are our communities. They're your communities. They're part of your country, your nation, our nations. And for them to be sustainable, we need to build their capacity so that their resilience and their long-term sustainability is driven by those community leaders, incorporating the knowledge and the journey of the next generations into the very essence of that journey. Because one thing's for certain about Indigenous people around the world, there is always a changing of the guard. Two-way knowledge exchanges is the fundamental platform I want you to think about. Ganma, Reed, Atoll 2020, Northern Territory with the Yolngu people. How we've now created that wonderful opportunity to share the load. We'll build your cultural capacity. You assist us in understanding technology and sometimes looking at softer options, nature-based cultural solutions for the long-term resilience and benefits of those communities, our country, and the natural resource we call Gali, water. I want to say thank you to my sister for asking me that wonderful question. I hope I've challenged you, because if I haven't, then I've failed this opportunity to be before you. So I challenge you to think through a cultural lens and think about how we can be better together for the future of this planet. Yane.
Thanks, Phil. We are challenged. Consider us challenged. And thank you again for your generous sharing of knowledge. We always appreciate it. I'll go to our final speaker now, who's Meena Gooley. For those of you who don't know Meena, she's a national treasure, a very amazing Australian water leader, the founder of the Thirst Foundation. And she, finishing in March this year, she ran 200 marathons in a year across the world. So Meena's here to zoom us out to a global perspective and to give us some thoughts. Mina, I'm going to ask you to close us out and speak about the impacts of water and climate change that you've observed during your travels. And I have one challenging question for you. We've heard a lot today about the impacts on people and communities, and you've seen a lot of that. Mina, can you tell us? Do you think the reality of what we've heard today, these stories from people and communities, do you think this is informing what we're hearing today at COP and what's being discussed in these global forums? Over to you.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Phil Duggan, my brother. Always a very hard task to follow in your footsteps, which are immense and extremely powerful. One of the things, Phil, that you and I have in common is that we have a mutual recognition that we have a major water problem. We know because we've both seen it. We've lived it. Over the last year, as Alison just said, I ran 200 marathons in 32 different countries around the world. What I saw was a journey that took me into the homes and villages and communities across the planet, and to really witness firsthand, from source to sea, some of the major problems that we have in our river basins. The degradation, the damming, the dredging, and the consequences of our damage to our healthy rivers, our societies, and our economies. In Central Asia, I ran up to the tops of mountains. I saw the impact of climate change. I saw the accelerating glacial melt. And I heard from experts that more than 1,000 glaciers have disappeared from our mountains, from this region, in our lifetime. I heard from local communities what is and what will continue to happen to our food and water security in downstream communities as we continue to lose more of these glaciers. I ran down rivers like the Danube or the Rhine right here, or the Loire in France, where drought made headlines last summer and where the water was so low I could literally walk under the bridges, where the economic shocks of the water crisis were so visible in the lines of cruise boats docked on the edges of the river systems, on banks where passengers were offloaded from those cruise ships so they could no longer navigate the waterways. These are not isolated systems. Turkey, Kenya, South Africa, Vietnam, India, Australia. What I have seen, what I have heard, including what I have heard today, has broken my heart. Communities struggling to cope with the worsening water crisis. Too many questions about why, despite all the signs, we failed to act. And we're still failing to act right now. Deep in the heart of the Amazon, I ran along roads where rampant deforestation had created a moon-like landscape, and where the sounds of birds had been replaced by the roar of chainsaws, where local communities talked to me about the horrors of watching their land burn as fires lit to clear the stumps from the land rapidly grew out of control. And this year, we see the consequences. Deforestation, climate change have combined to a devastating effect, fueling historic drought that has created water levels that are 120 years low, isolating communities that rely on the river for their water, their food, their transport, their supply chains, their livelihoods. These supply chains, these livelihoods are strangled. The message from all of these people, from these places, is clear. We have no time to waste. We need to drastically scale up global efforts to mitigate and adapt to climate change, and we need to do it now. As one of the guides said to me when I was hiking up to the top of one of the glaciers that you saw in the pictures, Mina, please tell these people directly, the time for soft language is over. We need real action, and we need it now. He's not alone. In the Colorado River in the United States, low water levels are threatening farms, cities, and supply chains. Stark, white bathtub rings circle the walls of the Hoover Dam, a permanent reminder of the historically high water levels that are now at some of the lowest levels ever. At Lake Powell, locals like this talk to you about what it was like to kayak around Lone Rock. This rock. A rock that is now so dry that I could run around it. A rock stranded in the middle of desert sands. And for the first time ever, experts are talking about the risk of dead pooling, a time when hydropower plants that fuel much of the West will actually cease to function. But here in the Colorado, at least for the first time, action is finally being taken. States are coming together to agree to cut their water use to save not only the river, but the future of the next generation. But the truth is that this is not just about policy and regulation. This is also about people coming together to forge change. In the Ganges, farming communities are joining together to create cooperatives, sharing information, technology, expertise on how to access capital to enable them to invest in new systems, mechanisms, and tools that will enable them to grow more crop per drop. And to be honest, it's here that I find the hope for our future for the next generation. This idea of collective action, of communities coming together to drive change, not only to create a global cry for help, but a global response to it. Communities that began in isolation, but together have become a global grassroots movement for change. Thousands and thousands of people in over 200 countries and territories right around the world stepping up for change, for water, and asking the world to run blue. Mums, dads, kids, policymakers, people, government officials, everyday, ordinary people just like all of us here today. People that inspire us to go bigger and bolder, to do whatever it takes to solve the problem of water and to close the gap on SDG 6. We know this will not be easy. But the truth is that big goals need us to be prepared to do hard things, like running 200 marathons, or being willing to set aside our traditional thinking and coming together to solve our global water crisis, river by river and basin by basin, protecting our communities, protecting our future, protecting all that we have. So here is my challenge to all of you here today. You've heard what we've all said. Phil, Alison, Sarah, Tony, Anna, Terea. This is a crisis that is terrifying in its scale and heartbreaking in its consequences for all of us. Stand up. Speak out. Share your stories. Do not be afraid. Help to close the gap between what's out there and what we live and what is in here being talked about around these tables. Help us together to build a wave of change around the world. Together. Because while individually we can make an impact, it's only when we work together that we truly can change the world. This is our moment. Let's make it count. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. That's us finished with those powerful words. I will accept the message stick back. Thank you, everybody.